The Cherry Blossom Walk by J.P. O'Brien. Things on Sycamore Street were, at present, rather hopeful. The chilly winter had finally relented, and Miss Ellsworth, busy scrubbing her already spotless kitchen, was delighted to look up through her front window and notice the first hints of pink flowering quince petals emerging in the morning sun. In the workshop at the bottom of his garden, Lars Gunderson was putting the finishing touches to his second handcrafted wooden storybook, the first one having been destroyed by Lars himself in the aftermath of the Pomeranian incident. He had vowed to Fjord and Snow, currently dozing in their loft above his workbench, that as soon as this one was complete, he would bring it to Miss Tiny, the diminutive school librarian and long-standing object of his affection, and confess to her how he felt. There would be no more excuses, no more procrastinating. The book itself stood almost as tall as it was wide, as though it were not really a book at all, but a box, containing fingertip-sized moments from classic children's stories, painstakingly carved by Lars onto individual pages of lime wood. The Three Little Pigs hiding from the wolf, Peter Pan sailing high above the London skyline, and Cinderella abandoning her glass slipper on the palace steps. Lars had even added a subtle border of Nordic runes around the very edge of the front cover, the secret meaning of which he intended to keep hidden. As he allowed himself the indulgence of admiring his work, he raised a hand to his stubble and recalled the mistletoe kiss that Miss Tiny had given him a few months earlier, what at the time he had dismissed as insignificant compensation for preventing the school from going up in flames. But the happy memory was quickly displaced by a stinging. Chasing romantic dreams was something Lars had been successfully putting off for all 17 years of his adulthood. Turning away from the storybook, he lifted his dogs down from their perch one by one and said, "Perhaps a bit of fresh air first, eh?" Fresh air aside, what he really sought was a last-minute pep talk from Marigold Weatherby, the eccentric former opera singer and Lars's closest confidant on Sycamore Street. She knew all about the crush, the gift, and the kiss, and if anyone could instruct his next moves, Lars thought, it would be her. On the walk to Marigold's house, he was so busy mumbling to himself and kicking the ground with his size 22 feet, he didn't even notice he was barreling right towards Tom and Catherine Evans pushing a pram. They had to leap out of the way at the last second. "Almost got hit by a train," Tom winked to Catherine. Lars apologised profusely, glanced down at the pram, and saw nestled within it the Evanses' new son, baby James. The boy's round face boasted an enviable mix of his parents' best features: Catherine's expressive eyes and button nose, and Tom's dimpled cheeks and wavy fringe. Just the sight of the smiling infant left Lars's chest feeling immediately lighter. Baby James had not yet encountered anything remotely as extraordinary as Lars's towering frame in his handful of weeks on this earth. His babbling quickly ceased, and he stared, wide-eyed, up at the giant. "He likes you," smiled Catherine, sporting the heavy cheeks of the chronically exhausted. "Would you like to hold him?" But Lars, daunted by the thought of cradling something so small and fragile in his enormous grip, bashfully shook his head. "Better not, I'm covered in sawdust," said the giant, holding his hands behind his back. "But I could perhaps knit something for the lad. No trouble." Standing at her bedroom window at that very moment above Lars and the Evanses was little Ruby Hershey, getting ready for school. She was putting on the swirly brown fur hat with the walnut R on the front that had been gifted to her by Lars several months earlier, just as she had every single morning since receiving it. Her mother feared it would eventually break the record of 2 years and 8 months currently held by Ruby's once-favoured pink and purple bobble hat. Her 3-minute older twin sister Daisy, on the contrary, had long since abandoned her own hat from Lars. She had even taken to teasing Ruby on the subject. "Why are you still wearing that thing?" Daisy asked as she pulled on her socks behind Ruby. "It's not even cold anymore." Ruby wasn't able to think of a satisfactory retort, but continued observing the conversation taking place on the pavement below. She was secretly glad that Daisy no longer wore hers. It set them apart, for once. "Whatever seems to be the problem, my darling?" Marigold Weatherby sang upon opening the front door to Lars. Before he could even respond, he found himself being ushered through to her living room for tea and toast. Miss Tiny's gift is finished," said Lars, taking off his hat and squeezing down into Marigold's floral two-seater while Fjord and Snow buried themselves in the cushions beside him.
"That's wonderful," cried Marigold from the kitchen. "Reason to celebrate."
"It is, but I don't know if—" Marigold bustled into the room carrying an elegant china tea set on a silver tray. She interrupted him before he could finish.
"Don't know what, darling?"
"Well, I won't know what to say," he admitted, fumbling with the hem of his jumper. The old lady handed one of the cups to Lars, then raised a wrinkled finger to her lips. She looked him up and down as she pondered his predicament.
"What's important is not trying to be someone you're not, my love. In your case, it doesn't matter so much about knowing precisely what to say. It's about trusting that silence can speak volumes."
Lars scratched his head.
"The first step in talking to someone," Marigold further hinted, "is just being in the same room. Now, that's not so hard, is it?"
"No," conceded Lars, gazing off to the side. "I can do that. But what if she—"
"Don't worry about all the what-ifs, my darling,"
Marigold said with a dismissive flick of her hand.
"Those ugly little things are no good to you. You're a romantic, and trust me, if you've made it, she'll love it."
Marigold's sage reassurance put a renewed vigour into Lars's step, one that lasted just long enough for him to return to his workshop, wrap the wooden storybook in a large sheet of red tissue paper, then slide it into his leather satchel. But rather than marching straight over to the school as he had promised Marigold he would, he took a detour to the bathroom to practice handing over the gift in the mirror. He soon noticed the reflection of a bemused Fjord and Snow sitting behind him.
"Human things," he told them.
Their 4 slightly askew black eyes continued to gaze up at him expectantly.
"You're right,"
he said, putting the satchel down.
"I'd better make a start on that gift for the Evanses first. They'll be expecting it."
At the far end of the street, Lorraine Hershey was letting herself into the old Hannibal house using the huge ring of keys she'd brought from the office. It had been on the market for close to a full year now, with not so much as a hint of an interested buyer, to the point where she didn't even bother trying to sell it anymore. In fact, so long had it been since she'd even been inside, despite living only about a dozen houses away, she decided that scheduling a pre-visit ahead of the following morning's viewing may not be the worst idea in the world. There would probably be cobwebs, maybe animal droppings too, she thought. And, if the rumours her girls were always whispering about were true, some actual ghosts as well. Lorraine herself wasn't the superstitious type. What bothered her more was her uncharacteristic failure to win victory over an adversary for any amount of time, be it a human rival or a creepy abandoned house. Even still, she made sure she'd be doing any business visits strictly during daylight hours. She opened the grand front door and stepped into the hallway. There was a discernible layer of grit on the tiled floor underfoot, and certainly more than a few cobwebs around, but nothing a few hours of elbow grease wouldn't remedy, Lorraine thought. In front of her, leading off one of the entrance foyer walls, was a door, partially open, concealing the dark steps down to the basement. Lorraine could feel a chilling draft leaking from the opening and instinctively stepped forward to close the door. She hoped the nice young couple coming to see the old Hannibal house the following day wouldn't be inclined to open it again, at least not before any contracts were signed. One completed bobble hat, a fully reordered tool cabinet, and 2 further pep talks from Marigold later, Lars was finally heading to the school. But by now almost the entire day had gone by. He stepped through the gates into a mostly deserted car park. From the main building came an unsettling rumbling sound like thunder, and Lars could feel his heartbeat intensifying. He was snapped out of his mild panic attack by the school's headmaster, Mr. Burgess, whistling towards his car.
"Mr. Gunderson, what a pleasant surprise," he said,
then paused at Lars's distraught expression.
"Oh, nothing to worry about. Just some boys rehearsing on the stage. That's what passes for music these days, I don't know. So, what brings you to our fine institution this afternoon?"
Lars rubbed the back of his neck with one hand and grabbed at the strap of his satchel with the other.
"Well, I'm, just here to visit,
Mr. Burgess held up a hand to spare the larger of the 2 men's embarrassment. Lars's boyish infatuation for the school librarian was no secret amongst his faculty, and several of the teachers even had a pool going as to when the 2 timid singletons would finally get together. Mr. Burgess couldn't help but take the opportunity to tip the scales in his favour.
"Ah, say no more," said the kindly headmaster, reaching up and giving Lars a reassuring pat on his tree-trunk arm. "The library, should you need it, is through the main entrance there and down the corridor on your left. Carry on straight, it's the double doors at the very end. Best of luck."
Then, with an exaggerated wink, Mr. Burgess turned on his heels and continued to his car. In the Burns household, young Charlie was sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, munching on a sandwich and watching the afternoon cartoons. The sofa behind him was almost entirely taken up by the papier-mâché Saturn costume he had worn to Maria Callas's party, which had then subsequently become baby James Evans's birthday. Much to the annoyance of their father, Dom, Charlie had been afraid of throwing the sphere out ever since his older brother Jake explained that the clothes you wear on the day of the birth of a child are sacred, and disposing of them would have dire consequences. Up in his room, Jake was engrossed in his new after-school ritual of watching drum tutorial videos and bashing a pair of drumsticks against a pillow on his knees. To his delight, the beginner exercises had already grown to feel like child's play to him. But the next step in his plan to win Leona Castellanos' heart would require both tactical timing and persuasive diplomacy. He needed to ask his father for a drum kit. Just as the current video was wrapping up, he heard a voice from the other side of the closed door. He held one ear of his headphones to the side to find his stepmother addressing him.
"A sandwich? I made one for your brother."
"No," mumbled Jake, a little impatiently.
"Are you sure? It's no trouble."
"I'm busy," Jake snapped, before pushing the headphones back over his ear and dragging the video slider to the beginning. Barely 20 seconds later, he was interrupted again, this time by 3 stark bangs of a fist against the door, accompanied by his father's voice.
"Jake, knock off that drumming when your mother is talking to you."
In the 8 years since his little brother had come along, Jake had often engaged in debate with his father about the distinction between a mother and a stepmother. Luckily, he knew enough in this instance to hold his tongue, and simply replied, "Sorry."
"It's not me you should be sorry to. Less of the attitude, okay? And what's going on with this school bag spilling out all over the stairs? Didn't feel like carrying it the rest of the way?"
"No, I just—" Jake began.
"Get downstairs, clean up your mess, and apologize."
The orders were unequivocal. The teenager sighed, then shoved the pillow away from his lap and watched the drumsticks clatter to the floor. Upon finding the library doors, Lars cautiously pushed them aside and peeked in. He had never before set foot in Miss Tiny's peaceful world, but she clearly ran a tight ship. The shelves were ordered, the chairs straightened, and a handful of students were sitting in silence, diligently reading. On the far side of the room, with the golden sunlight skimming low across her turned back, Miss Tiny stood on a stepladder, returning books from a trolley to the shelves. Lars's throat turned to dust, and he felt the urge to back straight out of the door again and pretend he'd never been here. But Marigold's words echoed in his mind.
"The first step is just being in the same room. Now that's not so hard, is it?"
He took a deep breath and went inside, forced to duck slightly to fit under the door frame. 2 girls at a nearby desk looked up from their books and giggled. Lars edged as silently as he could towards the unaware librarian, reasoning that the last thing he wanted to do was startle her. This had the completely opposite effect of placing him mere inches away when she turned back towards the trolley. She gasped as a book flew out of her hand and clattered to the floor. Every eye in the room was now squarely on Lars.
"Lars,"
whispered Miss Tiny with an unmistakable flush on her cheeks.
"This is a surprise."
He cleared his throat, but made a noise that came out more like a growl. He turned bright red and bent down to retrieve the fallen book.
"I'm sorry, I didn't mean to sneak up on you,"
he said, his fingers trembling against the book's cover as he straightened up and handed it to her. Even with his feet firmly on the ground, he still dwarfed Miss Tiny on her stepladder.
"I just wanted to see, that is, I was just wondering hoping, that you might like to go, well, for a walk with me."
Miss Tiny dropped her gaze to the floor and her hair fell in front of her eyes. She pushed some of the light brown strands back behind her ear, revealing a little smile and rosy cheeks. Lars had never seen anyone so beautiful.
"That's sweet," she said. "I would love to, but I need to stay here until the last student has left."
There was a sudden scraping of chairs as every student in the room dutifully shoved books and pencil cases into their backpacks and headed for the exit. The last girl, just before closing the door behind her, leaned back in and gave a thumbs up to the librarian.
"Oh,"
gasped Miss Tiny. She looked up at Lars, who was tightly clutching the strap of his peculiarly shaped satchel.
"Well, let me just collect my things."
Lars Gunderson was not the only resident of Sycamore Street putting his heart on the line that evening. In his kitchen, Adrian Ross was anxiously checking the clock and laying out ingredients for a special dinner he had been planning ever since his man-to-man with Tom Evans in the hospital waiting room. When his girlfriend, Helena Petras, arrived home from her shift at the animal hospital that evening, she would be treated to Adrian's carefully curated meal of the finest foods her dietary restrictions would allow. The dessert, in Adrian's pocket, was the ring with which he planned to propose. But he was still only part way through cooking when he heard the front door. Adrian nearly spilled a load of hot oil at the surprise. Helena stomped into the kitchen. Her hair was a spiky mess, and there was a large stain all down the front of her scrubs. She gave Adrian a distracted peck on the cheek before turning to leave again.
"Is everything okay?"
he asked, stepping forward in an attempt to hide evidence of his secret plans. Helena stopped in the doorway and idly tugged at the straps of her backpack.
"It's fine. Just a long day. I need a shower. A cat barfed all over me. You don't mind if I sort myself out and then come help you after? Smells good, though."
Adrian grabbed the edge of the counter behind him so his shaking wouldn't be so obvious.
"Of course, you do your thing."
He watched her drift down the corridor and head into the bathroom, neglecting to even set her bag down first. He then heard the door lock and the shower click on.
"I knew tonight wasn't the right time," he thought.
He reduced the heat on all the pots and pans and moved to the closed bathroom door. He tapped on it gently with a knuckle.
"Is everything all right?" "Oh,"
came the surprised voice from inside.
"Yes, it's fine. Just give me a second. Sorry."
After a long while of stewing in his paranoid thoughts, Adrian heard Helena emerge from the bathroom. A few moments later, to his surprise, she appeared in the kitchen in a button-down shirt and jeans with her short hair combed. She was remarkably overdressed for collapsing at home, Adrian thought. She moved towards him, appearing to be concealing something behind her back. Adrian just stared at her.
"Did you want to go out or something?"
he asked. She seemed rattled by the unexpected suggestion.
"What?" "I don't know. You got dressed up again. You're being weird." "You're being weird. Shut up." "Fair enough."
Before he knew what was happening, Helena dropped down to a knee and was pulling a slightly crushed bouquet of flowers and a ring box from behind her back.
"I love you," she began, "and I appreciate everything you do for me, for us. You're my best friend and my partner, and there's nobody else I would rather spend my life with. So, will you marry me?"
Adrian could feel a surge of giddy happiness pulling at the muscles under his eyes. He stood there for a moment, speechless and forgetting to breathe.
"Hello?"
Helena eventually said, a little worried by her partner's expression. Adrian blinked and knelt down beside her on the floor, beaming with delight. He wrapped his arms around Helena and pulled her close, trapping the bouquet between their bodies and crushing it even more than her backpack had done.
"I will. Yes. I can't believe it. This is incredible."
Helena grinned out of the side of her mouth.
"I'm glad you feel that way." "No, it's not that. I mean, I do, but I was going to propose to you tonight."
Helena's face lit up.
"Really?" "Really?"
he laughed. He scrambled for the ring in his own pocket and held it up.
"I had a whole evening planned for you, but when you got home you just seemed so not in the mood. The entire time you've been in the shower, I was trying to come up with a whole other plan." "Well, I was nervous," Helena admitted, scrunching her eyes closed. "And I was desperate to clean up first. But I told myself tonight was the night, no matter what. It's been on my mind a lot recently. I've been speaking with the guys at work about it forever, and I just thought, well, I love you so much, and I know this is where we go next. I guess I was too excited to wait any longer. Plus, I really wanted to be the one to ask. Sorry if that's not the way it's supposed to be."
Adrian smiled and squeezed her tightly.
"Well, there is no way. A spaceman told me that recently. Helena raised an eyebrow over his shoulder. What? Well, he wishes he was a spaceman, Adrian mumbled to himself. I don't know what you're talking about, but you're so adorable I can't stand it. The two kissed on the kitchen floor and gradually returned to their feet. It was when Adrian turned back to the cooking that his face grew sad. What's wrong? Asked Helena. Nothing. Can I just go ahead with my proposal as well? Like, pretend that none of this happened? That way I get to do mine too. Helena gave him a wink. Please do. Lars and Miss Tiny were, by now, walking side by side through Arbour Park. They were following a path suggested by Marigold that meandered under a natural arch of newly unfurled cherry blossom trees. The scene was perfect. Vivid flowers, fresh scent, gorgeous orange clouds overhead. It was everything Lars had hoped. But conversation between the two had remained sparse.
The colour's nice,
attempted Lars. Miss Tiny nodded. Beautiful. A heavy silence fell between them and they kept walking. From the branches nearby, some birds chirped happily to one another, and Lars wondered why he couldn't even do what birds do. I'm glad it's not so cold anymore, offered Miss Tiny after a little while.
Yes,
answered Lars, chuckling with relief. But then he just cleared his throat and looked the other way. When they arrived at the end of the arch, they found a park bench, and Lars invited Miss Tiny to take a seat with him. The bench had clearly been designed with normal-sized people in mind, and it looked comically small underneath Lars's huge frame. Miss Tiny's legs didn't even reach to the ground.
I wanted to give you something,
Lars said clumsily, almost surprising himself. Before he knew what he was doing, his hands had opened the satchel and were pulling out the gift from within.
It's something I made, for you. I hope you like it.
Miss Tiny blushed as she inspected the wrapping paper. Lars watched her neatly open the sealed end and reveal the handcrafted book inside. Without saying a word, she ran her tiny fingers along the intricate carvings on the front cover. Then she opened the book and looked intently at the first page. She stared at the beautiful details for what felt like an age. Eventually, she spoke. Oh, Lars, I don't know what to say. You made this? It's extraordinary.
Just something I've been working on. It was supposed to be ready in time for Christmas, really, but, well, it didn't go exactly to plan. You see,
Of course, you must have been so busy with the play, Miss Tiny said. Don't worry, you were the star of the show. The whole staff was raving about it afterwards. Lars scoffed at being called a star, but hidden underneath his embarrassment was a little relief.
Hardly. I looked ridiculous.
Not at all. I thought you were very... The words dried up in Miss Tiny's mouth before she could finish.
Well, that's kind of you.
Lars jumped in.
Truth is, I'd never done anything like that before, but I didn't want to let Marigold or Mr. Burgess down.
Miss Tiny tilted her head. You didn't take part in school plays growing up?
Oh, never!
He exclaimed a little overzealously, causing the bench to shake beneath them.
I went out of my way to avoid that kind of thing. I didn't want people staring at me any more than they already did.
Miss Tiny let out a little laugh of her own. She began absent-mindedly running her fingers around the edge of the storybook on her lap. I understand. I felt the same. I spent my own school years hiding in the library. I would race to be the first one there whenever the bell rang. It felt safe to lose myself in stories. Lars imagined Miss Tiny as a bookish little girl, then smiled. It didn't appear so far removed from how she had turned out.
Yes, I had a feeling you liked books.
His kind eyes glanced at the gift on Miss Tiny's lap.
Which stories were your favourites?
Oh, too many to name. Enid Blyton, A.A. Milne. I always loved Roald Dahl. It helped that his best character and I share a name. Lars realised with a jolt that he didn't yet know Miss Tiny's actual name. Everyone in town had always simply called her by her nickname. He was starting to open his mouth to ask, but froze at how ridiculous it would be to do that now, and before he knew it, his window was gone. But I don't think it even matters, Miss Tiny was saying. So long as it helps the reader to learn or grow, I believe everything has its place on the shelves.
I couldn't agree more,
said Lars. In fact, when I got offered this job, it felt like a dream come true. In my library, children take their first steps into reading and writing, the most important thing we have. Both of my parents are professors, and maybe one day some of the children will become professors too.
I'm sure if you're helping them, all of them could become the most intelligent professors on the planet,
Lars said. Miss Tiny giggled, called him sweet, and shyly returned her attention to the beautiful hand-carved scenes in her lap. Lars eased back onto the squeaky bench and drew a breath. His worst fears about how this evening would go were at last starting to relent. He didn't feel he was doing too badly at all. Back on Sycamore Street, the Burns family were gathered for dinner. The two boys sat opposite each other, Charlie regaling the table with something he had heard at school that day, and Jake spooning some sloppy mashed potato onto his plate, his head a million miles away.
And Mrs. Gray said that a stiff breeze would blow him over, Charlie said, with profound confusion on his face.
Dom, with a fork full of green beans en route to his mouth, stopped and looked at his wife across the table, then rolled his eyes.
It's just a saying, son, pointed out Dom. She means the boy is skinny. She's just being colourful about it.
The beans resumed their journey. Charlie's eyes glazed over as he pictured his teacher's skin changing colour. Dom abruptly turned to Jake.
What's going on with you tonight, Jake? You've usually got a comment or two.
Jake shuddered out of his hypnotic state at the mention of his name.
Huh? Nothing. I was just...
Before he could stop himself, the words tumbled out of his mouth.
I was thinking, would it be all right if I got a drum kit?
The next noise out of Dom's mouth was a combination of laughing and choking. His cheeks turned an unsettlingly dark shade of purple, causing Charlie to assume that he, too, was just being colourful about it.
That's not going to happen, lad,
Dom said, when he had eventually composed himself with the help of a glass of water.
But Dad,
whined Jake, regretting getting onto the subject at all. His timing and diplomacy had gone right out of the window.
I'm starting to get really good at my rudiments. What drummers do you know who use a pillow instead of real drums?
Dom could hardly keep the smile off his face.
You must be joking. Absolutely no way. I thought battering a pillow up there all the time was bad enough. But a drum kit? They're too noisy, too big, too expensive. I'm sorry, but you'll have to let some other kid be the drummer in the band. Let their parents deal with having a drum kit in the house. Not us.
Dad,
argued Jake once more, but his voice was sounding thinner by the second.
Why don't you pick a less insane instrument to learn instead? Go for the ukulele. Those things are nice and small.
Dom,
came his wife's soft voice from the other side of the table, surprising everyone, especially Jake.
He's been working hard and I think it sounds good. At least let him make his case.
Dom sighed and began massaging the corners of his eyes with his thumbs. After a long pause, he looked squarely at Jake.
We can have a discussion about it, but this is not a yes. This isn't even a maybe. You understand?
After dinner was over, Jake was washing the family's plates in the kitchen sink, while Dom and Charlie were in the living room.
Charlie, can you please move this thing?
Jake heard his dad say.
No, it has to stay there.
Meanwhile, Jake's stepmother came into the kitchen and started to clear some things away from the drying rack, making space for Jake.
Let's see what we can do, she said.
What?
Your drums. We can break him.
Jake stopped the washing and removed his hands from the sink. His fingertips dripped on the floor.
Really? Go and tell Charlie to get rid of the Saturn costume. He'll listen to you. Do it now while your dad's in there.
With a wordless nod, Jake dried his hands on the towel and went into the living room. After barely a sentence from his older brother, Charlie was rolling the bulky costume through the kitchen and out the back door to the bins, carrying the cardboard rings under his arm. Jake appeared in the doorway to the living room and looked at his stepmother.
Okay,
she said, impressed.
The campaign has started.
Thanks.
Thank you, Sandy.
Sandy looked to the floor to conceal a smile.
Anytime. Now help your brother break down that thing to fit in the bins. I'll finish up in here.
Jake shuffled a few steps towards the back door, then stopped.
Sorry again for before. I appreciate you offering me a sandwich.
He ran outside before Sandy could answer, which was just as well because she had a lump in her throat. Conversation had now grown so seamless between Lars and Miss Tiny in Arbour Park that dusk had fallen without either of them even realising. But as they continued to wander aimless loops around the paths, Lars could see her shivering a little. Without thinking, he took off his jumper and draped it over her shoulders. Its lengthy sleeves hung all the way down to her knees. She reached down and flipped one of the sleeves across the front of her neck like a scarf.
"Cosy," she said.
They continued walking until Lars eventually turned to face her, grimacing. She stopped and looked back up at him.
"What's wrong?"
"I feel so silly for asking this now,"
he began, feeling the discomfort scratch at his throat like a ball of cotton.
"It's just, would you tell me your real name?"
"It's Sophie," she said with a harmless grin. "Sophie Tinsley."
Lars held out his hand for a shake.
"I'm Lars,"
he said.
"Sorry."
The gesture turned Sophie's grin into a laugh.
"You don't need to be sorry. Everyone knows me as Miss Tiny. I don't mind. It started with the younger kids. I think it makes me feel more whimsical to them."
"I can see that."
"And no one is being cruel. If anything, it makes me feel special. And I try to embrace whatever makes me feel special. So now everyone calls me Miss Tiny."
"Okay,"
said Lars.
"But you can call me Sophie, if you want."
"Okay,"
nodded Lars.
"Sophie."
Miss Tiny couldn't help but blush. They carried on walking.
"Try to embrace what makes you feel special,"
Lars repeated after a moment.
"That's like something my Mormor Sigrid might have said. She was my grandmother, and was so important to me growing up. She was very small too, but still one of the most confident and strong people I ever knew."
"She sounds wonderful," said Sophie. "I'd love to hear more about her."
Lars turned to face her, feeling so inspired he could have easily carved 100 more books. As they continued to talk, they circled around Arbour Park several more times, until the stars came out above them. Lars then offered to walk Sophie home to the other side of town, where the two shared some parting words and another kiss on the cheek. After Sophie handed the jumper back to Lars, her hand shot up and lingered on his arm.
"I had a lovely evening," she said. "This gift means the world to me. You really are the sweetest thing."
As Lars headed back alone towards his house afterwards, he felt like he was floating on air. The following morning, Lars spotted Tom and Catherine strolling past his house with baby James. In excellent spirits, he grabbed the blue and white bobble hat that he had left on the armrest of his knitting chair and hurried out to catch them.
"It's ready,"
he said, without even properly greeting the new parents. He knelt down and lowered the soft fabric onto the curious baby's head. The hat was too large and immediately slipped down over baby James's eyes.
"Oh,"
said Lars, scratching his stubble.
"I thought I'd made it small enough. Sorry."
"Terrible service," laughed Tom. "No matter, all this classical music we're playing him day and night, that cranium will fill out in no time. That's a really thoughtful gift. Thank you, Lars."
Catherine adjusted the hat while baby James babbled contentedly to himself. Just a few feet away on the other side of the fence, Daisy and Ruby Hershey were burying something in the soil. Hearing Lars's voice made Ruby stop mid-digging and peek through a crack between the panels. As always, she was wearing her Russian fur hat. The sight of Lars giving the baby a hand-knitted hat of his own made her cheeks burn hot. She stomped back up to her room where she ripped up the beautifully knitted woolen swirls into dozens of jagged pieces, then threw the carved R against the wall. It left a dent in the plaster and tumbled to the floor. Her perplexed sister watched helplessly from the door as Ruby kicked the pieces of fabric and cracked walnut across the room. Eventually, Ruby stilled and stood panting with her head lowered. Her messy hair, something very few people ever saw, covered her eyes.
"Why did you do that?"
Daisy asked, stunned. Ruby managed a shrug before diving into bed and burying her tear-streaked face into the pillow. Lars, Tom, and Catherine continued laughing together outside.
"Girls,"
an out-of-breath Lorraine said at the doorway, failing to notice her one daughter's sobbing or her other daughter's dirt-encrusted hands.
"You haven't seen Mummy's keys, have you?"
You have been listening to the By Torchlight podcast. For more, visit patreon.com/bytorchlight or search By Torchlight on Spotify and YouTube.